My life took a drastic turn just one day before my final exams because my parents accused me of something unthinkable and asked me to leave our home. I was part of a close-knit family, or at least that's what I believe. Now they want forgiveness, but I know what they're after. I never thought I'd be writing this, but here I am, still reeling from the events of the past few months. I kept telling myself that my parents were strict but loving in their way, and they always pushed my sister Lisa and me to be the best versions of ourselves. Lisa was the golden child, smart, successful, and beautiful, and she had everything going for her, including a wonderful husband named Brad who seemed like the perfect match. They married young, but after a while, they moved back in with us, and when Brad got a job nearby, my parents were overjoyed because they loved having them around, and in a way I did too, even though we were always comparing ourselves. I was still in college, and my parents still controlled a lot of my life. My school was close by, and when I suggested moving into a dorm to gain more independence, they shut it down right away. It wasn't just about saving money though, it was about control. They liked knowing where I was, who I was with, and what I was doing constantly. I told myself it was because they cared, but I knew deep down that it was suffocating. With Lisa and Brad living with us, our house was constantly busy, and it felt like we were all crammed together, trying to navigate adult lives while still being treated like children. My parents lavished Brad with attention, treating him almost like the son they never had. They would boast about him to anyone who would listen, and it was obvious that he could do no wrong in their eyes. I, on the other hand, did not pay much attention. I was working hard to balance my studies, part-time job, and a long-distance relationship with my boyfriend Mark, who was attending school in another state, while also dealing with my parents' criticism of my life choices. In particular, my sister's husband had grown arrogant after hearing how proud my parents were of him, and he would frequently ask me why I wasn't staying in the college dorms, even though he knew that it was their wish. Despite the tension, I tried to keep things peaceful by helping out around the house, cooking dinner, and doing my best to avoid getting in the way of Lisa and Brad. Lisa and I were never particularly close, but we had a cordial relationship with each other. Just as I had been compared to Lisa my entire life, they were now doing the same to Mark by comparing him to Brad. Without saying it aloud, they dismissed him whenever I brought him up. Brad, on the other hand, was always friendly and treated me more like a little sister than just his wife's sibling. We got along well, and I appreciated having someone who didn't seem to judge me the way my parents did. However, everything changed one day when my parents called me into the living room with serious expressions. It was just before my finals, and I was focused on my studies, and our interactions were limited to polite conversation and the occasional family dinner. They looked at me with disappointment and frustration, saying they had something important to discuss, and I felt a pit in my stomach right away. They said they had discovered some messages on my phone that seemed to prove I was trying to pursue Brad, my sister's husband. I was taken aback when they showed me these alleged texts, but they were so blatantly fabricated and out of context that I tried to explain that I would never think of Brad that way. He was like a brother. During this exchange, I pleaded with them to allow me to speak with Brad, but Brad seemed too shaken up by everything to have a conversation with me. With nowhere else to turn, I called my grandparents in desperation and tears. In addition, I had my own boyfriend, whom I loved with all my heart, but they wouldn't listen. It was as if all the trust we had built over the years was gone in an instant. My father was upset because he didn't like that I was staying with them and wasn't being taught a lesson. One day when I wasn't home, he came to my grandparents' house and struck me. I told them everything that had happened, showing them the actual messages that proved I didn't have any interest in Brad and that I was being falsely accused. My grandparents, who had always been understanding and kind, believed me without question, took me in, gave me a place to stay, and helped me through the worst. My father stormed out, vowing never to speak to them again after accusing them of spoiling me and undermining his dignity. It broke my heart to see the family torn apart like this, and I'd often felt guilty because I thought that none of this would have happened if I hadn't come to my grandparents. Then the unthinkable happened. My grandpa passed away suddenly. It was devastating. I had never felt so much pain in my life. But what hurt even more was that my parents didn't attend his funeral. I was struggling to keep my composure while trying to handle everything with my boyfriend's assistance. In addition, I had to care for my grandmother, who was devastated. Her husband had died, and her own son had distanced himself when she was in need. A few days later, my parents unexpectedly arrived at my grandparents' house. I was still in mourning, and their presence only reopened the hurt and frustration I had been trying to suppress. I asked them why they hadn't attended the funeral, and they casually claimed to be out of town, but I knew they were actually on vacation. My cousin had seen their Facebook post and told me everything, but I refrained from confronting them at the time because my boyfriend, Mark, was also staying with us for a few days to help me and my grandmother deal with the loss. When Mark came out to visit my parents, my dad asked me icily why he was there and if Mark's presence was an issue. This made me feel hurt. My father seemed completely unaware of the pain he had caused, so I asked him who he thought had handled all the funeral arrangements, who had ensured everything was done correctly, and who had been there for my grandma when she needed her family the most. Managing the funeral arrangements, supporting my grandma, and dealing with my own grief, all while my parents were away enjoying themselves and ignoring their responsibilities, made me feel frustrated. He was supposed to be the son who should have handled these things, but he had been nowhere around us, leaving me to pick up the pieces of our broken family. His glare said everything. He was clearly offended that I would question him and told me to watch my tone, as if I was still the obedient child he could control. But I wasn't that person anymore. Then, almost without warning, his entire demeanor changed, and the frustration in his eyes vanished, replaced by a strange calm. A moment ago, he was telling me to watch my tone, but now he was talking about forgiveness. He was suddenly the calmest person in the room, speaking softly and saying that he wasn't here to fight, that he wanted to let everything go and start over, and that he was here to forgive me for what had happened with Brad, as if that was something I needed forgiveness for. He also mentioned that he would let me stay here with Grandma, but that he wanted something that was his. And forgetting the past didn't make sense, and I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something wasn't right. Then it dawned on me that he was here for his inheritance. After everything he had done to Grandpa, including the betrayal and the absence, he wasn't interested in mending our broken relationship or making amends. He just wanted what he felt was rightfully his, regardless of the harm he had caused. However, he was unaware that Grandpa was well aware of his intentions. Grandpa, may his soul rest in peace, had taken care of everything. A day after the funeral, we were cleaning out Grandpa's room when we found a note in one of his drawers that read, "Call Bob." When we contacted Bob, he informed us that Grandpa had left behind a will that meticulously determined who would inherit what. In retrospect, Dad's timing was almost too perfect. It seemed as though he knew the will would be brought up soon and wanted to make his claim before it did. However, I must admit that telling him that I knew exactly what he was looking for gave me a great sense of satisfaction, because he wasn't here to make amends, heal our broken family, or even to offer forgiveness. Rather, he was here for Grandpa's savings. The money he felt was rightfully his, but that wasn't going to happen. Grandpa had made sure of that. With a combination of composure and firmness, I informed Dad that Grandpa had left all the money in my name and that I was now responsible for managing the last of his savings. As for the house, Grandpa had given it to Grandma, guaranteeing that she would always have a roof over her head and that no one would attempt to take it away from her. Initially, I had intended to break the news to Dad after everything had quieted down, when maybe we could have a polite conversation as a family. When I told Dad about the will, I saw the shock and disbelief flash across his face. For a brief moment, he was unable to understand everything he had heard. In a different world, perhaps we could have reconciled and discussed Grandpa's final wishes with respect and understanding. However, that possibility vanished the moment Dad entered the house with his entitled attitude, believing he could pressure and influence his way into getting what he wanted. Counting on it was no longer within his grasp, but as soon as the shock subsided, it was replaced by anger. He believed he had always supported his parents and accused me of lying and coercing Grandpa into altering his will, as if I had somehow planned this whole thing. The irony of him accusing me of manipulation was almost unbelievable, as he was the one who had left his family to pursue his own interests. But I refused to back down, explaining that Grandpa had simply known where my parents' priorities lay and acted accordingly to protect what was most important to him, his wife and granddaughter. His frustration only increased as the reality of the situation set in, and he attempted to persuade me that I should give the money to him because it was rightfully his as Grandpa's son. These decisions were made by Grandpa on his own long before he passed away, and Bob the lawyer could confirm everything I said. However, I refused to be influenced and reminded him that he had already made decisions and that those decisions had consequences. He had chosen to distance himself and neglect his obligations, and now he was paying the price. His wife, who had also been silent until this point, spoke up and begged me to change my mind and find a way to mend things, but it was too late. She also didn't react well. I recall her saying things like, "Wasn't it enough I tried to steal Lisa's happiness, and now I wanted theirs?" As they left, the tension in the room was nearly intolerable. I watched them go with a mixture of sadness and relief because my relationship with my parents had reached a point where there was no hope of reconciliation, and relief because Grandpa had protected us even in his absence. Grandpa had revealed their true colors, and there was no turning back. In the days that followed, I concentrated on helping Grandma adjust. Even though the grief of losing Grandpa was still raw, there was a sense of comfort in knowing that his last wishes were being honored. However, just when I thought everything had finally settled, a letter from Bob, Grandpa's attorney, arrived in the mail. I opened it expecting some final words that would reassure me that she was taken care of and that she knew she was not alone. I thought it might contain information about the will or perhaps a note of sympathy. But what I discovered inside was something completely different. The letter explained that my grandfather had established a trust fund in my name, which I already knew about from the savings he had left me. However, what surprised me was the condition that came with it. The trust was linked to a piece of property in Florida that my grandfather had secretly acquired years prior, and the letter stated that the property was to remain under my ownership, but there was a catch. If my parents tried to challenge the will or pursue any legal claim to Grandpa's estate, the property and the associated funds would automatically pass to them. The catch was that the property was merely a dilapidated old house, far from the opulent inheritance my parents would have anticipated, and the money was hardly enough to pay for the taxes and upkeep of such a property. I sat there in shock, realizing that Grandpa had not only anticipated my parents' actions, but had set a safeguard in motion. Bob called me a few days later to tell me that my parents had attempted to contest the will, had hired a lawyer, and were preparing to take the matter to court, convinced that they could somehow claim the inheritance they believed was rightfully theirs. Bob calmly and measuredly explained to me that if they attempted to do so, they would not only lose, but would also inherit a financial burden that would drain them dry. The news hit me hard, not because I was afraid they wouldn't win, but because it was exactly what Grandpa had predicted, even in his last days, that my parents would allow their selfishness to lead them to this point, and now they were walking straight into the careful plan he had laid for them. The trust would kick in as soon as they filed the paperwork, and the Florida property and all of its associated costs would become theirs. My parents had no chance because Bob had made sure that everything was in order and the will was clear. However, because they were obsessed with getting more, they persisted in believing that they could somehow override Grandpa's final wishes. On the day the judge dismissed their case, the trust took effect, and the Florida property and its associated costs were formally theirs. Naturally, they were outraged, but it was too late to realize that they had been outmaneuvered by the very man they had underestimated. In a way, it was the ultimate poetic justice because Grandpa had managed to protect me and Grandma from their intentions even from the afterlife. And even though I never enjoyed it, I watched from a distance as they frantically tried to deal with the aftermath by trying to sell the property, only to discover that no one wanted to buy a deteriorating old house with a mountain of debt attached to it. Their financial situation rapidly deteriorated, and they found themselves stuck in a mess of their own making. My dad is upset, but instead of apologizing, he started pleading for my forgiveness, portraying himself as the victim and saying that they only wanted what was fair. My mom has also been sending me voice messages and texts all the time, trying to sweet-talk me about everything, and she talks about how families argue, but always manage to move forward. I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure after everything they put us through. She kept saying Grandpa would want us to be together and how she only wants to move on from the past, but their actions speak louder than their words, and it's obvious that they haven't changed at all. They're not interested in making amends. Instead, they're interested in recovering the money they lost. And what's worse is that they've enlisted Lisa and Brad in their plan. Suddenly, my sister and her husband are attempting to act as peacemakers by contacting me. Lisa, who had hardly spoken to me since the accusation, is now acting as though she cares about repairing our relationship. They're all hoping that if they can guilt me enough, I'll give in and give them a piece of the trust fund. They're trying to wear me down to make me feel like I'm the one holding the family back, that it's my fault that we're all divided. And for the first time, I'm asking Reddit, am I in the wrong for wanting to hold on to what my grandfather left me, even if it means distancing myself from my family? Or should I try to forgive them, knowing full well that their motives might not be as sincere as they claim? I'm genuinely confused. Part of me wants to stand my ground and not allow them to manipulate me again, but another part of me wonders if maybe I should try to forgive in order to find a way to move forward. 2. Everything was surprisingly quiet after my parents' visit. It seemed like, even though there was no chance for reconciliation, at least the drama might finally be over. I let myself unwind a little, thinking that perhaps they had finally come to terms with the situation and moved on. But I knew deep down that this was too good to be true. As it turned out, just when I thought things might remain quiet, I got an email from my dad, and the tone of the message was chilling. He wasn't just angry, he was overflowing with resentment and entitlement. He wrote that he believed all of Grandpa's money was rightfully his, and that I was wrong for keeping it from him. He continued by saying that I should be a good person and give him everything. But as if to make matters worse, he brought up the Brad situation once more, saying that if I gave him the money, he would graciously forgive me for what I did. But if I didn't, I would face severe consequences, not only because of what he said, but also because of how far he was willing to go. The email was a direct threat, and it made me feel sick to my stomach. This was no longer just about money. It was about control, power, and his desire to dominate everyone around him, even if it meant emotionally harming his own daughter. As if that weren't enough, I began receiving messages from friends and distant relatives that my parents had been spreading a variety of false information about me, calling me a homewrecker and suggesting that I attempted to destroy Lisa's marriage and that I was some sort of manipulative gold digger. It was absurd because, although I didn't judge Brad at the time, I was absolutely not doing what they claimed. The lies were hurtful, but what really got to me was how low they were willing to go in order to damage my reputation. I knew I couldn't handle this alone, so I contacted Bob, Grandpa's lawyer, to see if there was anything I could do. I sent him an email explaining everything that had been going on, and Bob was calm and reassuring, but he didn't sugarcoat the situation. It seemed like they were setting me up to be the villain in this twisted story they had created, hoping that if they said it enough times, people would start to believe it. The good news, Bob said, was that Dad didn't have much legal ground to stand on because Grandpa's will was solid, and we had plenty of evidence to show that he was fully aware and in control when he made his decisions. However, he still had the legal right to contest the will, especially if he was arguing that Grandpa was coerced or not of sound mind when he made his decisions. This was a weak argument, but it was enough to drag us into a drawn-out legal battle if Dad decided to push it. The stress, legal fees, and the possibility of more lies and slander were enough to make me feel overwhelmed, even if Dad didn't have a strong case. I feel angry, hurt, and exhausted, and it seems like they will always come after me. My parents were supposed to be there for me, supporting me no matter what, but instead, they were tearing me down and attempting to take away the stability and security that Grandpa had worked so hard to provide. So now I'm getting ready. Bob stated that if we need to prove harassment or intent to defame me, it could all be crucial. However, there is a small part of me that occasionally questions whether I should continue fighting this battle or if there comes a time when I should just give up. I have started collecting all the documents and evidence I might need if this goes to court. I have also started keeping a record of every message, email, and voicemail that my parents send me. It may never be over, but what message would that convey? That they can take anything they want if they just push hard enough. That's the only reason I'm sticking to my principles, and I hope the future brings us better opportunities. Until then, goodbye. Update 2. Let me tell you about what has happened in the last few days. I definitely did not anticipate Lisa showing up at our door one morning, completely out of the blue, and I was preparing for a confrontation with her to hear every possible accusation against me. But instead of anger, I saw a broken woman. She appeared tired. Her eyes were red from crying, and before I could even ask what was wrong, she broke down in tears, her whole body trembling as she tried to speak. She told me what had happened to Brad. Lisa had decided to surprise her husband by going to his hotel without warning, but when she arrived, she discovered him with another woman. The shock and betrayal were overwhelming. Trying to salvage what little dignity he had left, Brad finally told the truth. It wasn't me. It was never me who sent the texts that Lisa had seen, the ones that had accused her. She confronted him right there, screaming at him, demanding answers and asking how he could do this to her. In the heat of the moment, she threw all the accusations she could think of at him, including the one that had destroyed our family. He had saved the woman's number under my name to avoid suspicion. It was a cunning and deceptive way to hide his tracks, but it all backfired when Lisa saw the messages and assumed the worst. As Lisa told me this, my mind was reeling from all the hurt, suffering, and damage that had been done because of one man's lies, and the fact that my parents had believed him without question. It made my heart ache to think that I might be innocent again, but what Lisa told me next was even more devastating. After learning of Brad's betrayal, she had gone to our parents, expecting them to help her deal with the mess her marriage had become. Instead of offering comfort, they told her to make it work with Brad, to forgive him, to let it go, and to move on, as if this infidelity was only a small issue. They were all willing to put Lisa's well-being at risk in order to maintain the appearance of a perfect family, because they were more concerned with keeping up appearances than with their daughter's happiness. I was angry that our parents could be so unaware of what their children were going through, but I also felt a great deal of sadness for Lisa. She had overcome so much, and instead of being supported, she had been dismissed. Lisa kept apologizing, saying she was sorry for everything, for not believing me, and for allowing herself to be manipulated by Brad and our parents. She claimed she didn't know who else to turn to, that she didn't know what to do anymore, and that she felt trapped, alone, and completely lost. I didn't know what to say to her. Part of me wanted to scream, to let her know that this was the result of her own choices, that she had believed things about her own sister that weren't true. But I also wanted to comfort her and reassure her that we would work things out together. We spoke for hours that day, and by the end, I realized that we needed each other more than ever. But I also knew that things would never be the same between us. Grandma told Lisa that she could stay with us for as long as she wanted to, and I'm not sure what will happen with our parents now that Brad's truth has come to light. It might change their attitude because all of their manipulations were based on that lie. Let's see what happens next. 3. Things have begun to calm down, and although Lisa's emotional scars are still visible, it makes sense that she is still having difficulties. However, we have begun to look into divorce proceedings for her, making sure she is completely separated from Brad. This is a gradual process, but it's an essential step for her to begin healing. On a more positive note, my parents finally did something unexpected. In a surprising turn of events, Dad actually reached out to Grandma and apologized for everything he missed during Grandpa's funeral, the way he treated me, and the strain he put on all of us. He assured Grandma that he wanted to make up for it and tried to repair the damage. What they should have done a long time ago was to ask Brad to leave their house. He's no longer staying there, and honestly, that's a relief. It's frustrating that it took this long for them to realize the truth, but at least it's finally happened. Even though I'm still cautious about his intentions, Grandma brought up something significant a day ago. She told me she wanted to make sure her will was in order, and she hasn't shared this with the rest of the family. Grandma was firm with him, reminding him that although his apology was appreciated, it didn't change the fact that he wasn't getting any money or the house. What shocked me the most was that Dad actually accepted this without any argument. It felt like a small victory. However, she told me that she intends to leave the house to Lisa. I think this is a great decision because, after everything that has happened to her, Lisa deserves to have something stable and meaningful. Being a part of our grandparents' legacy might help her find some peace. Now that everything has happened, I've had to reevaluate what family really means. It's not just about blood or tradition. It's about the people who support you through difficult times and believe in you even when others don't. Although things are far from ideal, we're all moving on. Lisa is beginning to rebuild her life, and I'm hoping that my parents might finally be changing, even if it's only a little bit. Time will tell if they truly mean it or if this is just another stage in a long line of disappointments. But for now, we're all doing okay. My parents may never be the same, but I'm okay with that because I have my grandma, my sister, and the support of those who genuinely care about me. Doing our best is all I can truly ask for. I know I haven't said it enough, but I am incredibly appreciative of all of your encouragement and guidance. Without your messages, I would not have made it through. I appreciate you giving me so much. Goodbye. Confidence.